So today's presenters, we'll start with Adrian Sakiwa.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian Sakiwa. Before we begin, I will start with a land acknowledgement. So I'm coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. New Mexico is home to 19 pueblos, as well as Apache and Navajo peoples. The three closest pueblo to the Albuquerque area are Isleta, Sandia, and Santa Ana. And also want to acknowledge the Karankawa peoples, which are the original peoples from Corpus Christi, which is where Colleen is located. So I have these questions for you to reflect on, digest on. Well, I introduce myself a little bit more as well. So I guess my official title under this project is a cultural ambassador. I'm serving as also an organizer for this project. I'm also affiliated with the University of California at Santa Barbara. I'm a fifth-year graduate student there in the Department of Linguistics. Also affiliated with Colang. I'm a member of the advisory circle as well as a nominated convener for Colang. Also affiliated with the American Indian Language Development Institute as a alum and as a upcoming instructor for the summer 2021, and also with Natives for Linguistics, which is now it's a special interest group under the Linguistic Society of America, but it started out as a NSF documenting endangered languages project called Expanding Linguistic Science by Broadening Native American Participation. So I put the email address there. If people can use that to get on our mailing list and ask more questions. We have some different initiatives going on, such as definitely peer mentoring, as well as looking at linguistics resources for curriculum teaching wise. So yes, that is me. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Adrian. And I'm Colleen Fitzgerald, and I really want to thank Adrian a tremendous amount for her participation in this project, which is happening thanks to a grant from the National Science Foundation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm currently Associate Vice President for Research and Professor of English at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Before coming here, I was Professor of Linguistics and Director of the Native American Languages Lab at UT Arlington from 2008 to 2019. I spent 4 years as a program officer at the National Science Foundation, managing the Documenting Endangered Languages program from 2015 to 2019, and I worked on a lot of different initiatives. So I would say I am very well versed in the foundation. As a PI, as a principal investigator, I myself have secured more than $1 million in external funding, including 5 awards from the DLI DEL program, and both NSF and National Endowment for the Humanities. And actually, I think I might be in negotiation for another award. Two of my last 3 awards aren't even linguistics, but are all about building capacity. And I think that's really the common theme of this project and the other projects. So thank you, Adrian, for providing our land acknowledgement. I also want to thank the members of the advisory group who have helped us plan this. So a number of people have provided feedback and guidance and insight along the way: Carly Tex, Wesley Leonard, Adrian, Susan Gare, Mary Lynn, Eva Tchaikovsky-Higgins, Susan Penfield, Carlos Nash, Raquel Sapien, and I think I got everybody. I went out of order on my list. So this project, the funding for the DLI Fellows and Linguist Partners, is through the National Science Foundation grant BCS 2039991, Strengthening Capacity in Dynamic Language Infrastructure for Tribal Nations. And I've told you who our advisory committee is. They really have been terrific. And in our last meeting a couple of weeks ago. I got some really great ideas on some of our activities. But to let you know what this project is about, it's to lead to the creation of proposals focused on questions largely shaped by Native Americans and the insights of those community members as scholars is likely to lead to a different focus on important research topics that may have been neglected by outside scholars or not investigated. And so it will advance and expand the range of scientific advances. So Native American theories of language having the opportunity to flourish in the same way that Native American languages have provided materials for linguists to advance the study of language and linguistics. And the way we proposed to do this in our project is to create training opportunities and establish partnerships between members of Native American groups and linguists with grant experience. And those linguists can be Native American as well. But the goal is to increase submissions and successful awards for projects led by Native American PIs, especially those based at Native American institutions like tribal colleges or tribal museums or tribal language programs. And since I know some of the names on the registration list, I know some of those institutions are represented. But by doing so and strengthening capacity and language infrastructure for tribal nations, diversifying the pool of investigators and the research questions and epistemologies of those investigators, and advancing fundamental knowledge in the language sciences, if we're able to do all those things, we will, in fact, advance the goals of the project. So we're going to start with talking about what a DLI fellow is. And DLI is dynamic language infrastructure, which is the way the documenting endangered languages / dynamic language infrastructure is now the new joint name of the program that I used to run when it was DEL. And so a DLI fellow is someone who is involved with their tribal language activities, interested in applying for a National Science Foundation grant, and ends up being selected by our project to participate as a fellow. So right now, everyone in the audience is a prospective fellow, a prospective partner, someone kind of maybe gleaning interest and knowledge to take back to another group, and also our advisory committee. A DLI linguist partner is a person who has experience with writing, submitting, and or evaluating National Science Foundation grant proposals, and who will provide support for a DLI fellow under this project. And so the kinds of roles that you as audience members might take on could be a community language scholar, so a language speaker, activist, or advocate, a community scholar / linguist, or a linguist partner. And I wanted to give you an example from some of my own collaborations, thanks here to the University of Oklahoma, the National Science Foundation, my collaborator, Mary Lynn. This was the Oklahoma Breath of Life workshop in 2014, and this was funded by the National Science Foundation. And part of the goal was to, through partnerships between linguists and people in the language sciences and affiliated domains, and community members wanting to work on their language, to build capacity and foster partnerships. So a community scholar, and I'm drawing on Natives for Linguistics and the definitions and roles. And so a community scholar here would be an individual doing language related work in their own communities. And that might be as a program administrator or as a language advocate or teacher. And they're basically wanting to submit a grant for supporting their language work. And so they would probably be serving as a principal investigator or a co-principal investigator, or maybe as a team member, but they're committing as a community scholar is committing as basically what you would need to do as a prospective principal investigator, as a DLI fellow, attending trainings and with webinars on these proposals, working with the linguist partner, to enable that grant to be written and drafted and revised and get that but ultimately the community scholar who's elected as a DLI fellow will be writing the grant. The linguist partner, whoops, I think I skipped, sorry. And then a community scholar linguist is individuals who are professional linguists from Native American communities and whose work brings those indigenous perspectives into linguistic research. And we know more and more we are seeing indigenous linguists. And in fact, we see them at all stages in the pipeline: undergraduate, graduate, maybe having gotten undergraduate or graduate degree and being in the community, and then maybe coming back and earning a PhD, becoming an assistant professor or an associate professor or a full professor. And at all of those stages, we have indigenous linguists. So, but there's a dual role there, right? There's the context within the community, and then there's the context within the academy and with linguists. And so this person might be someone who's interested in participating as a partner, or they might be someone who's interested in participating as a fellow. So there's a couple of different ways community scholar linguists might participate. And a linguist partner, this is again has been a role that's been very useful in a number of capacity building workshops, such as the National Breath of Life Archival Institute, the Oklahoma Breath of Life Workshop, or Natives for Linguistics. And here the expertise will be coming from NSF grants and in collaborating with the attendee, so that DLI fellow can articulate their project's existing intellectual merit and broader impacts in a way that articulates and aligns with the genre of an NSF proposal. So NSF proposals are reviewed in very particular ways. And so the partner will be providing that assistance and support. But also, you know, one of the things that we have noticed in the building capacity domain in regard to grant writing is that often somebody attends the grant writing workshop, but then wants some support afterwards. And so we have really tried to make a robust role for the linguist partner, so that when that grant is being developed over the next 6 or so months in preparation for the September deadlines, that partner is there. And so we haven't made space for undergraduate and graduate students to be linguist partners, merely because of the roles and wanting to have that knowledge of NSF, hopefully as a reviewer. So if this project goes, so that right now we have an open application, and the deadline will be on April 16th. And you can remember that because we're wanting to secure 16 fellows for participation and 16 linguist partners. And so what we're thinking, and I would say this, I don't know, I think I saw Carly, yeah, so Carly Tex is on the call, and Carly wasn't at our last planning meeting, but there was a really great suggestion that we draw on what ACLS, the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, did in terms of training and Breath of Life, the California Breath of Life, online. And so we're probably going to adapt and do that. And essentially some of what they did was have the content available, the lectures available, and then use the breakout groups to facilitate the working together. And so we're thinking that we'll have some content that will be set up in advance. And then we'll have these virtual training sessions with the partners and the fellows, and people will be working on starting to work on parts of their components. And I will also say the advisory committee also thought that it would be really helpful actually to really have perhaps not have, or at least at some phases, have a really network of mentoring. And so there are a number of people who are involved in different ways. And have a lot of potential resource and knowledge to share. But we're scheduling May 24th to 27th as the virtual training sessions that we would expect anyone selected as a fellow or a linguist partner to attend. And then there would be some viewing ahead of time. That's phase one. And so the proposals are due September 15th. So that means that with early planning and early work, there will be a lot of time for feedback and revisions before that final submission is due. So that's phase one. That's sort of the intensive training section. And then we'll go into phase two, which is the grant writing. And so throughout the summer, the fellows and the fellows will draft and revise the different components of the grant. And the partners will provide support. They'll read, they'll comment on, and help in the revision. And so the fellows and partners should expect that the project, the full proposal, and there's a lot of pieces to a National Science Foundation grant, but the full proposal, that one-page summary, a 15-page project description, and all those supporting documents should be ready by August 1st, 2021. And why is that? Because we're going to have phase three, which is the capstone mock review panel. The way that grants are evaluated at the National Science Foundation is, first, when they come in, they're sent to experts in particular areas that the proposal has. So for example, if you have written a proposal on Mishtek, one of the Mishtek varieties, and you are looking at morphology, it would probably be sent to a morphologist, someone to look at word structure. It would be sent to someone who works in that language family. And then, so specialists, they go out for specialist review. And then you have a small group, anywhere from 9 to 16 people, depending on how many proposals come in, who each read a chunk of the proposals. And they write reviews, and they come together, and nowadays it's virtual, but they come together to discuss and evaluate and rank the proposals against each other. So, you know, if you read one proposal, you have no context, right? You know, maybe it's a good proposal, maybe it's not a good proposal. Maybe it's attainable goals, maybe it's not. It's just like if you grade a stack of papers, you know, you read the first paper and that gives you a sense, okay, you start off with a sense of how the quality of the papers are, but you read a few more papers and then you can calibrate, and you know which paper is really an A paper, which paper was a C paper, and where things are falling in between. And so that's you know, a reasonable analogy for how a review panel works, which is basically the panelists they're assigned, say, 10 proposals. They read 10 proposals and write reviews for all of them. And then everyone comes together, and the lead and scribe on each proposal lay out what the project is about and the strengths and weaknesses, and also put into context those reviews by the specialist. So we're going to replicate that for you. And we're going to basically, if you've got your draft and all its pieces ready by August 1st, what we will do is have a mock review panel. So it can, you know, if the panel is scheduled for August 15th, we have to give the reviewers, the panelists, some time to read the proposals. So that's really why we need to have a deadline in order to be able to give the reviewers time to read proposals. And they'll write reviews, and then we'll discuss them. And one way this will be different is that at an NSF review panel, you never get to be there for the discussion of your own proposal. So the goal is to provide guidance that will strengthen the proposals through the capstone review panel and give you a sense of how external evaluators might evaluate the proposal. So by being critical, by giving the toughest feedback possible, with everyone, you know, who's participating in that panel as a reviewer, putting on their review hat with the goal of you having the strongest proposal possible, you know, we'd want to have these also done so that you have at least 2 weeks to then do additional revisions before that September 15th deadline. So the time commitment, you know, if I were to tell you what I think that the time commit would be, if you want to write an NSF grant for a DLI fellow, it's probably about 100 hours. Now, obviously, this is not going to be 100 hours over a single week or even 2 weeks. This is going to be over, you know, we're chunking it out over a 6-month roughly period. So some of this will be gathering the information and the support documents to write the grant, writing the grant itself, revising the grant, working to route it through your organization. In many cases, you cannot just submit a grant. You have a grants office in your organization. This also includes the instructional workshops and the videos offline that you'll be watching, the subsequent sessions you'd have with the partner in working on the components of the proposal, and also that mock review. And that mock review will be in summer 2021. So DLI partners will also make a substantial commitment, but they're not writing the proposal. Now it's possible they might write, some pieces here and there to help, but in general, it's the principal investigator who will be working on that. And it may be in your context, you have some extra assistance, but a tribal grant writer will not be able to write. Again, I would say this from all the years I've been involved with this program as a reviewer or as a panelist or as a PI. There is it's a 15-page project description. So there's a high level of sophistication that will be expected to talk about that language and the activities. And a grant writer is just not going to know enough detail like you would know as someone who is involved in your language program or playing a role in a collaboration or in your language project. So really the partner is going to be the partner is going to be there for helping, but it's really going to be that support that you didn't have a section on this, or well, this section, here's what I think the panel might expect or a reviewer might look for, that kind of thing. So the application itself will take 45 minutes to complete. So the application to be a DLI fellow or a DLI linguist partner is about 45 minutes. It's got 8 sections. Some of them are not applicable to you. And I'm going to go through those sections and then let you know as well what we also decided to do in consultation with some of the advisory committee was to use the application itself as a possible way to get us more information on Native Americans and the language sciences. So there is some application data that relates to engagement with language and linguistic training and NSF funded projects in broadening participation. Sorry, I had the waiting room popped up. And so our team is going to, if you give consent, so you can apply and you cannot give consent. So it is your choice. But we view this as an opportunity to really have a lot more insight into what barriers and what facilitating programs further engage or encourage Indigenous participation in the language sciences, review of Indigenous proposals. So this is what we're hoping to get out of this, sort of a sense of, what are the pathways into the language sciences and allied disciplines. So again, that's voluntary. So I'm going to stop a minute just so you can, if you want to take the QR code or the short links. But what we have an info sheet, and this is because there is we did go through our IRB, or Institutional Review Board, for collecting data from the applications. And so we have an info sheet. And I also put together just a courtesy copy of the full application. I should tell you, we will not take the applications over email. You will need to use the link, and the link is the third link. And then all the links are at that at the project webpage, which is at that QR code. All right, so the sections of the application. So you're not going to fill out all of these sections because there's sections based on whether you're wanting to be a fellow or a partner. And there's other sections if you have ever done an NSF grant before, because the other thing, and I see some people on here that I'm wondering if they're interested in that, but some people have already gotten one of these grants and now they want to go for phase 2 of their project. And so all the questions on there that are about your project, we've constructed this application in part using some of the methods in the DLI, in the Natives for Linguistics application, which was very informative. some of the pieces of another project I'm involved in that's funded by the NSF through their Build and Broaden initiative, and also the pieces that you have to write in an NSF grant proposal. So you can think of your application to this program as helping you already start on the grant proposal. All right, so section 1 is informed consent. You can, again, say yes, you can say no. We will not be using whether or not you say you give consent or do not give consent to make decisions about who will be participating in the program. We're really just trying to glean data on how linguistic and language training and also NSF grant proposals, those attitudes on, and some of the questions are, if you've ever reviewed a proposal by an Indigenous community, what did you notice, or have you been on a panel? And so it really is, I think there's some information we're hoping will actually help inform National Science Foundation. So then we request the contact and affiliation information so we can contact you if you're accepted or let you know that you were not accepted. And section 3, you're going to indicate what category you're applying for, your primary professional role, educational background, previous participation in language training institutes like Aldi, CoLang, Breath of Life, and familiarity with NSF grants. We've also indicated a beginning investigator category, which is someone who has not been a principal investigator on or a co-PI on any federally funded awards. So you talk about your language work, and there's a series of more detailed questions about your project and existing resources and gaps. So like I said, it's not busy work. It really is designed to help you start on your application, on your grant proposal. Section 5 is for DLI fellows with investigators and teams who have prior federal funding. So what's your language work in the prior project? There's more detailed questions about the grant that you served on, and more detailed questions about your new proposed project and existing resources and gaps. Section 6 is for linguist partners or community scholar linguist partners, and asks you to discuss your involvement or plans for future involvement with Native American languages and language communities, including documentation and reclamation efforts, your interest in attending and participating as a workshop as the partner, any practices you implemented or ideas you have for advancing fundamental knowledge in the language sciences through the creation of proposals focused on questions shaped largely by Native Americans, and your perspective on reviewing proposals that are grounded in frameworks or epistemologies that you may not be familiar with. Section 7 requests additional details like how you heard about the project, to individuals who can speak to your work, and how you envision your participation in this workshop in the long term in terms of strengthening language infrastructure and building capacity for tribal nations and or Native Americans in the language sciences. Well, section 8 requests demographic information, and I should note that we would, our plan in terms of the research side of the application, that we will de-identify. So if you, there's a section where you could say you want your contribution to be acknowledged by name, or you don't want it. But unless you want your contribution to be identified by name, what we intend to do is to de-identify. So if you gave us a long explanation that was very tribe specific, we would not use the name of the tribe because that's identifying information. It also, and again, I think that there is maybe a couple of people on the call today who are thinking about this, but sometimes people want to link applications, and the National Breath of Life, for example, has linked, and also California Breath of Life, have linked the partner and the fellow. And so that's what we're giving you. You should just include the name of the person in section 3. And then I wanted to give you some information because I know some people might not be as familiar with the DLI grants themselves. So there's a joint solicitation documenting, dynamic language infrastructure / documenting endangered languages, and the solicitation number is 620-603. And it's a partnership between National Science Foundation and National Endowment for the Humanities. And so the current solicitation covers senior research proposals and conferences. There's 2 deadlines a year, September 15th and February 15th. I should add, I know there's folks on different stages in career. And so one thing you might be thinking is, hey, I'm maybe not at the stage to do go back a second, to do the senior proposal, but I want to do a dissertation grant. We would definitely be interested in people who are wanting to do the DLI dissertation grant proposal. And if you were thinking about a postdoc, or if you were thinking about maybe you're at another kind of career stage, I think there's a lot of different opportunities at National Science Foundation. And so it's really structured for the DLI funding program. However, we're leaving open the option for potentially people in a different funding stream at NSF. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because maybe some people are in it, maybe somebody's thinking, hey, I might be up for this one. So NSF in a nutshell, it's an independent federal agency created by Congress in 1950 to promote the progress of science, advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, to secure the national defense. Its annual budget is around $7 billion, and typically awards are 3 years, and there's 11,000 new awards every year. National Endowment for the Humanities is an independent federal agency created in 1965 for the study and interpretation of modern language, linguistics, literature, history, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology, and many other fields. It's one of the largest humanities funders in the US. Its annual budget is $155 million. And in 2019, it awarded $126 million to more than 1,000 projects. You really need to be attentive to the agency mission. On the one hand, all the proposals are submitted through NSF, and the National Science Foundation also conducts the review process, which means you're using NSF criteria, NSF proposal elements. But it turns out this is a really, in a sense, this is almost a very ecumenical funding partnership, because you have NSF that's looking to advance scientific knowledge, National Endowment for the Humanities that's looking to advance the humanities. And then within NSF, there's 4 programs that are stakeholders in the NSF side of things. One is linguistics program, so that's in the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. Another is Arctic Social Sciences program. And I know there's some people on the call who have been able to benefit from funding through Arctic Social Sciences or been involved in those projects. There's the Tribal Colleges and Universities program. So these are all partners in the endeavor, as is Robust Intelligence, which is in the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate. So preservation and access is the stakeholder in the joint solicitation. And then one other thing to know is NSF funds workshops, but NEH does not. So some projects might be more suited for one of those tracks than the other. And I think the other thing to know is that there are, budget considerations. So if you had a computational project, a lot of times it's one computational project that gets funded in a given competition, and it's $450,000, but it's very, very rare that any of the other program partners fund at $450,000. So more likely, 200,000 is probably a reasonable number. Arctic Social Sciences, those projects are often more expensive because of the location. But in general, you want to keep in mind that $450,000 is not what most projects will be funded at. And that's important to know, because that's what the solicitation says, that's the upper max. But overall, this is a program that's got, $500,000 here, $500,000 there, $500,000 there. It's pulling from different partners. Now I'm kind of working under the assumption that maybe computational methods is not one of the tracks that folks here might be interested in. And if I'm wrong on that, please do put something in the chat. But language description and infrastructure are the two of the tracks, and computational methods is the third. So in terms of what it funds, it's to exploit advances in human language technology to build computational infrastructure for endangered language research, supports projects that contribute to data management and archiving, development of next generation of researchers. It can support digital recording, documentation and analysis, and archiving of endangered language data, including the preparation of lexicons, grammars, text set samples, and databases. And in terms of eligible institutions, institutions of higher education, so accredited campuses in the United States, that includes community colleges, that includes tribal colleges. There are some special instructions for international branches, nonprofit and non-academic organizations. So See Alaska got something in the last round of funding. So also museums, observatories, American Philosophical Society also got an award. So professional societies, at one point the Linguistic Society of America had gotten an award from this program. And then tribal organizations, including other American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian serving institutions. So for-profits are not eligible to apply, but personnel in for-profit organizations can be co-investigators. And I'm just going to tell you, it's an institution that can determine who is eligible to be a principal investigator on a submission. So for example, at my university, I actually am, as a staff member, you have to have permission in order to be PI eligible if you're not in a research science position. If you're tenure track faculty, then you're eligible. But if you're adjunct faculty or professor of practice faculty, then you're not. So institutions can really determine. But I've seen grants that came in where somebody was, the institution allowed them to be PI, and they were at an institution. Well, actually, I think that one of the grants on the See Alaska one, last cycle, they've got a faculty member from Simon Fraser in Canada. So there's definitely, there's a lot that institutions determine. So some possible projects might be audio and video recording of fluent speakers, especially specialized uses or knowledge, transcribing or annotating recordings, digitization projects of existing analog materials, or wider access to previously collected material, or conferences. And technically this project is a conference. And then I wanted to do some resources, and then we'll go through the questions. And again, I have some slides, and we'll be before May putting some video content up. But I did a series, and some of you were here for that in the fall, a 5-week webinar series that go through the dynamic, this program in much more detail, as well as the elements of NSF proposals, the review process, and also budgeting and archiving and data management plan. And we had some discussions, that were some panel discussions, and 3 of those that were recorded, and I can share those. These are the contacts for the solicitation, and Mailing and Kendall are coming from linguistics, Chase, and also they've just hired a second Tribal Colleges Program Officer, Regina Sievert. Terry Langenden is the Robust Intelligence, Computer Science, Computational Linguistics contact, Erica Hill for Geo, Arctic Social Sciences, and then that's the NEH contact. And actually, I don't know if Raquel is here, but I did see Carlos come in the room. And Raquel Sapien and Carlos Nash did a Dell outreach video series that went public in 2015. And this is a really great, freely available series. We're hoping that maybe some of our content might get added into that with this new grant. But it's got a lot of feedback from a lot of different people on these different pieces. And it's, the presenters were all told to do this in an ordinary language. So a lot of the grant talk is not always so ordinary, because, linguists. All right, so I'm going to just go back to the screen. And Adrian, do we have some questions?
We had just one come through the chat. Can DLI fellows be nominated via the application process?
Well, I don't know what that means. Does that mean, can you suggest that? I don't know what that means.
I think that like they want to.
I can
Okay, yeah.
elaborate.
Go for it.
So I'm thinking of applying for my work with the Institute of American Indian Arts, but my language teacher who works for the Osage Nation, I can see him being interested, but I'm not sure, without having an academic background, if someone would have seen this type of application, and I'm wondering whether I would try to advocate for them to apply, or if I could apply on behalf of a community worker who's not really doing work in an academic sense, but is doing revitalization work as a community revitalizer.
Well, there's a lot of capacity, I think, actually in Osage Nation for language work. And Mary Lynn, am I seeing you nod?
That was a yes.
So I think that, so I mean, I think in general, the application is pretty detailed. So I think that, you know, if somebody's not going to want to do that, I think that it's probably, I mean, again, if you're not going to want to write the application, I think the application is a helpful way to see if you actually are kind of interested. I've done these workshops in a lot of different contexts. So I did a workshop 2019 at the American Indian Language Development Institute. And, you know, it was not as rigorous. It was a 2-day workshop, 2.5-day workshop. So the application wasn't as detailed, but still in that application, the folks, you know, that I was asking them for the pieces that are how you kind of assess whether it's something that could fit for, you know, for this particular funding initiative. And there were some people who it wasn't clear their project would fit. And so I had some emails with them to see, but in that group, there was only a couple of people, who were linguistics students and Indigenous, but everybody else, I mean, there were people, so there was somebody from a community up in Alaska that attended, and they had been very successful getting other kinds of funding. So I think that, you know, I think it's going to be a range of folks that apply. I think it's probably, it's a lot of work to put together the application, but again, we're kind of thinking of the partner as being that support network and being that help. But that all being said, I mean, you know, a lot of these projects are things that are teams, and teams of people might be writing different pieces of the proposal. Did anybody else want to add anything to that? Chelsea, did I get everything for you?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think the Osage would be really well positioned. So I would tell you that. Because I think there's a lot of resources and they haven't gotten funded before. And it's, again, if I think, you know, as a sort of former program officer, what are the things that might make a panel excited about a proposal? I think I'll tell you, the panel's always excited about proposals from community members. They're always very excited about that. And, you know, I think that's something that panel has been historically very committed to.
Are we ready for the next question?
Yes.
Okay. Should entities who are not yet NSF awardee institutions begin now to qualify?
Well, that is a really great question. So first of all, I'm going to tell you that grants.gov is the worst way to submit a grant to NSF. There was at least a couple of years where I got March phone calls from someone in a community or someone who had helped folks in a community wanting to know, they hadn't heard anything about their NSF grant and did it get funded? And there was, I mean, I had to say, I never saw a grant. And grants.gov does not play well with NSF. Now, it is certainly possible to make it work, but for example, if you submit through Fastlane, which is NSF's own portal, you can submit any kind of document and it will convert it into a PDF. If you submit through grants.gov, they all have to be PDFs or your application will be rejected. You have a 72-hour window after you submit it in grants.gov to have it be accepted, and you get an email if it didn't get accepted. And if you don't know that you're looking for that email, then you don't know that your grant didn't get accepted. My last year, so this would have been fall 2018, I had 3 proposals that were in that were sort of stuck in like purgatory, like grants.gov purgatory, and could not make it through. And in fact, the Fastlane, I mean, I spent so much time on the phone with the Fastlane help desk. They said that even the grants.gov help desk would tell people to call Fastlane. And the Fastlane people were like, yeah, I mean, it's just really bad. People shouldn't use grants.gov to submit to Fastlane. And it's like especially because there's so many multiple documents. So I know that for the people who are familiar with Fastlane, you might find it kind of ironic for me to tell you that Fastlane is a better portal for this, because everybody hates Fastlane a lot. But I will tell you, Fastlane is the way to go because grants.gov does not interface well. And so when so I have a collaboration with Chickasaw Nation and with the Chickasaw Language Revitalization Program and with Joshua Hinson, who's the director. And in 2012, we submitted an NSF grant as a collaborative submission, which is linked. So we each are on our own proposal, but you swap a pin and the proposals are linked. And I worked very carefully with my research office to give them instructions to get them registered onto Fastlane. You need your DUNS number, and it takes a couple of days, but it is doable. But it definitely, I certainly can tell you, I relied really heavily on my research office to as a support team. So it's like, you don't want to wait until the last minute. You want to kind of have all these pieces together, and getting into Fastlane and registering is definitely something you will need some assistance probably from your research office. So, and you do need to be an organization. So you cannot submit this particular proposal, you cannot submit as an individual. You could submit to the National Endowment Humanities Fellowship. So the fellowships got spun off last year, and it's a separate solicitation. And I would actually, if you're wanting to do it as an individual, I would encourage you to look at that and to do that.
Alice, did that answer your question?
So the answer is yes. Entity who is not yet an awardee institution for NSF should get the ball rolling now. Yes. And they should do it through Fastlane.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And then you need to, after your institution is registered, then you will register to get a PI, a principal investigator number, an ID number. And then what was I going to say? There was one more thing. Well, and there was one little piece, and Alice, if you've never gotten funding from NSF, just please know your institution will undergo financial review. And so if you're recommended for funding and maybe your program officer wasn't like me, but I would always tell people, this is coming. You should expect this. You should answer things quickly. You should work with your grants office to make sure you get them everything that they need. There's a sort of new awardee packet that basically you have to go through, and there were institutions that didn't make it through, and so a lot has to do with whether or not you have financial practices that are documentable. It doesn't matter whether you've gotten funding from other federal agencies. NSF is going to do its own review, and maybe some of that is because of the categories of funding. So as I worked with the people in who did these kinds of reviews a lot. And I actually was a resource for people in NSF because they knew I had a number of new awardees who had gone through this review. So not only did I coach people like, hey, it's coming, get your stuff together, make sure you don't miss deadlines. But also I learned what parts of the budget made you more risky. Participant support. Participant support doesn't have indirect costs charged on it. And so it's got to be segregated in a different kind of account than all the other money. So if you have a lot of participant support and you don't have a way to segregate those funds, that makes you more risky. If you have a subawards increase risk. So there's these things that increase risk. And, so that's, but again, I mean, when there were lots of errors, so I can think of one case where they didn't get approved. And I mean, they were giving different indirect cost rates. So they didn't clearly communicate a single indirect cost rate. They made a lot of mistakes. And so if they made a lot of mistakes, then that didn't inspire confidence by the auditors.
Can you give me a ballpark on the least amount of time it might take to get approved by NSF so people will know at least that?
You mean to be in the system to apply, or do you mean to get funding?
I mean to be in the system to apply.
To be in the system to apply, I don't know, it's like a week. It just depends on how much and how easy it is to get your information. Like I do remember that you've got to have the DUNS number. You've got to fill out some stuff online. But once you've registered, it shouldn't be more than a week or two. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of getting a PI ID, it's pretty quick. But one thing to know is that there's two pieces of the house that are working on NSF grants. I was like, is that, I used that alarm. So I was thinking it might have been my alarm. So one side of the house is like the intellect side, and one side of the house is the money side. And so on the money side, basically two people are doing this. So you really do need your grants office. When you put everything together, your grants office will sign and authorize it. So they'll submit it and they'll authorize it. And sometimes that second step doesn't get done. And then it sort of hangs out in limbo. And it's just a second step. And so again, there's sort of like these, having done it for 4 years and worked with a lot of different organizations of different capacity, it was always the same things I would tell people because I knew where things could break down. But you will, that person, whoever the person is for the institution, it shouldn't be you, because they're going, if you get funded, the person who's the authorized organizational representative should be from the research office side of the house, the grant side of the house, the money side of the house, because they're signing on a different set of things than what you're signing on. And you have to have two separate people, two different individuals. And so if you're functioning as both people, you're going to have to change it anyways. So change it. Start getting your research office comfortable with the idea of your exotic NSF funding.
We're ready for the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does development of a voice recognition software qualify as a tool for language preservation?
I would say there has to be a scientific question there. So there would have to be something that's, so we did fund something actually right before I left, and that was a project on Seneca, and it was a collaboration between Rochester Institute of Technology and University at Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo. And one of the things that it used out of the box speech recognition software, and there weren't a lot of recordings on Seneca. So that was like a really nice thing for the linguists. The linguists were like, okay, there's not really recordings on Seneca. This is amazing to bolster the documentation. There was an indigenous computer science PhD student from the community. That was awesome, right? People love that. I can tell you, one of the things that was interesting for the computational folks was that the kind of language that Seneca is and the way it builds words, these sentences that are words, polysynthetic, that's a real challenge for speech recognition software, and that was their hook. But I think it was a project that was funded by both of us, both the computational linguistics fund of money and the Dell fund of money. So the question would be, what's the hook? There should be something that's pushing forward in terms of knowledge. I mean, that what NSF would call knowledge.
Okay. And can one serve as a partner to more than one fellow?
Wait, ask that one more time.
Can a linguist partner, or can someone serve as a linguist partner to more than one fellow?
Well, you know, at our last kind of committee meeting, we really talked a lot about kind of multivalent mentoring, really talking about a networked, dispersed model of mentoring that might, at least at some points, be a good way to do things. In other words, some people might have really good knowledge on X, and so we might want to have a number of people then work with a number of different people, and the different people have different sets of knowledge that they're really quite an expert on or able to share really well, right? It might not even be that you're the best expert, but you're a good communicator and you're able to do things. So I think we would be open to that, but if you're offering to or thinking about working with two people, it might be helpful to think, could I get, so what I think what people would find more appealing is that you rope in another mentor, and essentially, and maybe that person, you know, maybe you're really experienced, but that person that you're roping in as a second partner is maybe, you know, maybe coming from a different phase of life. And this is an opportunity for them to grow, maybe grow their knowledge of NSF. Maybe they don't know NSF as well, but they know some other part of knowledge. And so I think, you know, overall, this is a project that views knowledge construction in a very feedback loop kind of way, that we're all learning and we're all, you know, teaching. So I think what I might think is, instead of being a mentor to a partner to two fellows, could I find another partner that's maybe not, if they were doing it by themselves, maybe their application wouldn't be maybe as competitive, but as a like quadruple threat, that's where you hook people. You can tell this is how I work, right? Like, I hear ideas, I'm not sure about them, I kind of work through them, and then I get myself excited about these ideas because I think about what excites other people, right? So really, like, what, and that you know, because I teach a lot of grant writing course, I think grant writing might be my secret skill, my superpower. But having sat in a lot of panels, when multiple people get excited, that really can help your project. And so thinking about what are the kinds of things that gets a group of people excited has something I've spent a lot of time working with people on. So I would think it would be kind of, well, it's 4 linked applications, 2 partners and 2 fellows. And even if it's sort of like a double cohort, you know, that would be fun.
So there's a related question in terms of how our fellows and partners matched, which I'm not sure if that was addressed with what you were just saying.
Well, I mean, you know, I have to say, I really feel that the advisory committee sort of sent me for, you know, got me really rethinking things, got us rethinking things with that last conversation, because we really were thinking, okay, it was right after ICLDC. And so thinking about the different formats and how might we, the International Conference on Language Documentation and Conservation. And actually, if I might see if I can put, so if somebody is able to kind of log in, I did actually make a copy of Carly's presentation to see if I could share it, and people who didn't go to ICLDC, you know, maybe I shouldn't do that. All right, but I might do it afterwards. Just because I'm recording this webinar, which I've now outed myself on. But, you know, I think that I think that in terms of the pairings, I mean, I was probably imagining that there would be a number of people who might not know, might not have someone in mind, and, you know, how that pairing would work. And I think as the group, I mean, I believe when we're doing review of the applications and the advisory committee is looking at the applications, you know, we'll look and see what the, you know, again, what the potential for a contribution is, you know, overall to the goals of the project and the outcomes that we would like to affect. You know, it might be that what we end up with are, you know, maybe we end up with a number of, say, junior faculty who are, you know, maybe they haven't even reviewed for NSF, but what they've done, you know, but then we maybe have a group of people who are, you know, they've been on panel, or, you know, again, Susan Penfield, who's on our advisory committee, is a former program officer, she's done lots of grant writing courses. You know, maybe what we end up doing is, you know, kind of roping in some folks for extra support. And what we're doing essentially is building capacity in the partners and in the fellows, right? So, I mean, I think there's a lot of experience in there's a lot of experience in this webinar, right? I mean, I don't know everyone on the call, but I know a lot of the people on the call, and what you've been involved in, even if this is maybe the more, you know, I know I've done some phone calls with some of you, but so, you know, what do we want to happen? I mean, I think what we want is to have a robust ecosystem of Indigenous knowledge, and making sure that there's a place at NSF where that knowledge generation is being funded. And I think that's really what the goal of this is. There's no program officer running that program anymore, right? And so this program, you know, is really designed to make sure that that knowledge that's really, I mean, people always talk about NSF as being a black box, you know, how do you crack in? How are the decisions made? What are the things that are going, you know, how does it work? And, you know, sharing the cultural, you know, social capital that I have, that our advisory committee has, that you know, the people who are applying as partners and fellows, you know, I think, again, I mean, if we think about a very distributed way of networked mentoring, you know, the fellows are going to be leading as much as the partners, right? It's really, there's a lot of expertise in the room, and that room, metaphorically, the breakout room, you know, I think it offers an opportunity for us to, you know, as linguists, you know, someone like myself who's coming as a Western white, you know, linguist, educated in linguistics in the 90s, you know, I'm not the linguist I was 30 years ago or however many years ago. So if we're wanting our field to evolve and adapt and change how our field works, a lot of that is recognizing the different expertise that people have and creating space for that. And, you know, again, helping them achieve the success at NSF, if that's what folks want and that's appropriate. And when I say appropriate, I mean, the project is, there are not conditions. So for example, if you're wanting to make a lot of recordings, but you're not comfortable having those recordings in an archive, then that's accessible, then this is not the right program for you. But what I would say is there a different way you can play it? Can you build capacity in your community? Maybe, you know, funding the documentation, you know, that's not going to fly because people are not comfortable with the depositing of recordings and materials. But having a workshop where you bring in some trainers and train people how to do documentation, right? There you go. That's something that's different. It builds capacity. And it could also allow you to have a conversation around what your community is interested in, and what, you know, at one point people might say, yeah, we don't want to put anything in an archive. But it may be that, you know, Well, we think that we would be okay if it was this kind of content and these kinds of topics, as long as we didn't do these other ones. And so we could do a documentation project around content that we are comfortable, so maybe it's, maybe it's historical reminiscences, or maybe it's cooking knowledge. And then maybe it's also something that's got a dual function, right? So maybe it's foods and lifeways and cooking and hunting. So everything kind of oriented around food lifeways. And it's also material that can be used for teaching. And then you have a broader impact, right? So I'm kind of expecting, having done multiple kind of iterations of applications like what we have, I'm expecting that what people are putting in that application are going to change, because you're going to be people will be interacting with each other and be thinking, I saw somebody raise their hand or lean forward like they were going to.
There's a few more questions, or there's to get through. I want to make sure it's before the 1.5-hour deadline, or timeline. Is there a DLI, DEL requirement for linguistic analysis?
Well, not necessarily, but you would want to think what I think you'd want to think what you're doing that's beyond just recording. And so maybe what you're doing is, again, maybe you're kind of curating knowledge. And so what you're doing, and again, I think the more you can think, could I do something that would be really valuable for other communities? So, okay, our community, we don't want to do linguistic analysis, right? And again, it's going to be linguists who evaluate your project. So you're going to have to frame things that will fit with that mindset. But, we just wrapped up the Chickasaw documentation project. I don't even know what % of that corpus we were able to get through, because at some point it was really challenging to think, okay, let's spend a lot of time on transcription when our time with elders and so few elders was really precious. So we really, and then, also we had a strategy for recording that really got people interested and people had fun with it. So, I think you want to think with every grant, you're going to think about what your hook is. And your hook, it should be something that's working with the strengths of your team. If you, when I was program officer, I had just countless conversations. People would call me. And again, some folks are on this call where, you've called and, we talk and I just always tell people, what are you good at? What resources do you have? What are your strengths? And the project should reflect that, because every project will be evaluated on the team's ability to carry out the work. So if you go with your strengths and you go with what your team has, and if you have a gap in this area, you find a way to kind of spackle over that gap, that's going to make the project stronger. So we funded one project that we funded, I think it just wrapped up, was to the Wallapai community. And it had been a while since we had funded anything on a human language. They wanted to do ethnobotany, and the project they ended up doing, and they've got like 6 of the Pi groups on both sides of the border. And they were really interested in ethnobotany and plant life because of how the climate change is really changing what they're seeing in the desert. And so, but here's the thing, if you're talking about plant knowledge, and you haven't worked out ahead of time what you want to archive, there's a lot of potential for conflict over intellectual property. I think probably this is a group of people that's familiar with, in general, how medicinal knowledge and botanical knowledge can basically be monetized by commercial groups, and then the community ends up with nothing. In fact, maybe having to buy the medicine that some of the knowledge bearers helped that researcher kind of discover, not really discover, but so, I think one thing that's really valuable is but a lot of communities are interested in the plant knowledge, right? So what they're doing is having conversations about what the protocols would be for documenting ethnobotanical knowledge and language. And hopefully we'll put out a paper on that topic. So.
All right, the next question is it possible to apply for funding to build capacity in Indigenous language revitalization as a field rather than for language work with this specific community?
I would do it in a different way. So I think what I might do is pick a different program at NSF, or and in fact, actually, I suspect that you might be able to frame something depending on what your capacity, right? How you're viewing building capacity in language revitalization and who the audience was. And by audience, I mean the individuals and the organizations that we're talking about. But I think you might be able to, there's a lot of interest in this, what's called the science of broadening participation. So broadening participation is increasing inclusion. And so for example, if you've got Native American principal investigators, and these are folks who are first-time investigators getting NSF funding, you've broadened the pool of principal investigators at NSF, and you broaden the participation in the language sciences of Indigenous Americans. So a project that framed language revitalization capacity as also fitting into sort of the educational pipeline, I could see as contributing to the science of broadening participation. When I was at NSF, I did a talk, it was an internal talk, although I did allow one or two interlopers. But it was an internal talk on increasing participation of Native Americans in STEM through capacity building. And I went through all the, a lot of the programs that NSF had funded, some of which I've been involved in, that have broadened the participation of Native Americans in the language sciences. And, I think training is playing a huge role. And I think you could see that through what ACLS has done in California. And again, right, there's some folks on the call who are working on their PhDs or finished their PhDs and maybe came into doing the linguistic side of language through their language work and supporting their community's efforts. So maybe, but maybe not Dell, but I would say, I like I said, I kind of think that there's a lot of potential in this project for increasing the number of Native American, Indigenous, Native Hawaiian, and Alaska Native PIs at NSF. And so even if the Dell DLI program isn't the right program, I would say go for it, because I think we could find a program, depending on what,
Next question is, do you have to be working for an organization to apply for this?
The awards, NSF only makes almost always makes institutional awards, not to individuals. One exception would be the postdoc. So there is a postdoc program run out of the directorate that NSF, that DLI is in. But it's pretty rare. And again, if you think back to the financial conversation we had about new awardees, that's partly why there's such resistance. So it's pretty challenging, but there is the NEH fellows, and maybe somebody could find a link to the NEH website for where they have the information about the fellows. And I think at least last year, the deadline was September 30th. And it's a much smaller, application. I think it's a lot shorter, but that's another option as well.
Okay.
And I'm just going to add that Carly, when we did the webinar series in the fall, Carly also said we had a session on budgets and stuff, because one of the things Carly heard was people were like, oh, the money, managing the money for NSF awards is such a hassle. It's like all these, you know, and I think it's probably true. But that might be another reason why, as an individual, you wouldn't want to do it.
Okay. The next question, will the cohort meet to talk about their reviews and how to read reviewer comments if they have to and want to reapply?
Oh my God, that's brilliant suggestion. You mean after the deadline, or do you mean, I mean, I think if there were people who were doing resubmissions that, you know, so you submitted and didn't get funded, that would be something to do. But I love that idea of, yeah, I don't know. I love that idea. It makes sense, right? Because I mean, that's what I do in my office. I'm like always meeting with people who didn't get funded and they want to do a resubmission, and I go through and tell them what their reviews meant. And I can do that because I spent 4 years there. I mean, I was like, I worked with engineers. I didn't just do this program. I did all these other programs, which means, you know, I can read a panel summary and reviews from engineers, and I might not know what they're talking about technically, but I know how I know how to understand what they're trying to tell the PI.
I think that was it for all the questions, and at least that what I got through the chat. If there's any, oh wait, there's one that just came in. Do both the fellow and the partner receive funding support for the work if selected? How is the funding dispersed and what does it cover?
Well, the way, so there is funding for the partner to keep working with the, you know, with the fellow. And in part that is because sometimes there's people are, you know, well, the original version of this workshop was that there was going to be like 2 days of work at the LSA, at the Linguistic Society of America meeting. And then the partner was going to do some work with the, you know, with the fellow, and to keep the partner kind of as a, you know, it's not like a lot of money, but it's just enough to kind of encourage them to keep, to not disappear. And so there was this small honorarium on a quarterly basis. And then if that person did not show up for the fellow, what we would be able to do is use that if they needed to, you know, they could, maybe they could use it to work with an archivist, or, you know, they could use that honorarium in another way. And then it was going to cover, and then the funds were going to cover travel and you know, the attendance at the in-person event. But it really doesn't look like we're going to be doing things in person, because we, you know, to be able to have to plan them, we'd really have to have space booked. So, so right now the funds, there's $200 sort of per quarter. It's not during that workshop, that training week, it's sort of after, to keep that relationship going and keep that support coming. So a lot of people are doing a lot of things without getting compensation. The idea is that, you know, hopefully the fellows are working on the grant as part of an organization. And so that organization is paying the salary. We would be paying your travel to attend, but we're not doing things in person. And so we can't even use it on refreshments.
Those are all the questions that came through chat, and on my end, it's 4 minutes till 5 Mountain Time.
Well, we thank you for coming, and you know, I actually got a lot. See, again, I got a lot of ideas out of this about what we might want to do, what we haven't thought about, and what we might think about. I think, again, there's a lot of different ways this can play out, and we are, you know, really just learning. We're learning from you all. We're learning from each other, and you know, we're really just trying to find ways to use NSF funding and also National Endowment for the Humanities funding to further this kind of effort. And there's a lot of, right, there's a lot of different kinds of effort in this Indigenous language revitalization and documentation space. And it's incredibly valuable for, I mean, I know everyone on this call is very dedicated to this endeavor. So thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email where did I put it? Here we
I'll
go.
put it in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
native.languages.lab@gmail.com. And that's it. So thank you for joining us.